registered.
Good evening. Welcome, everybody. It looks like we have most of our attendees. There's still a few people that are showing up, but that's okay. And a few of you have signed up a little, we won't call it late, but you've signed up nonetheless in the last few minutes. And not to worry, we will definitely send you out your ebook in the next few minutes so that you have it throughout the event. So keep your eye on your email here in the next 3 to 5 minutes. I'll make sure that those get sent out to you very soon. Other than that, welcome to tonight's event with the great Cooley. Dennis the Magician Cooley will be talking tonight about the Muse Sings, his gorgeous book of poetry that we here at Bay Press have published with great enthusiasm and We just love it. So before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that we are transmitting here from Treaty 1 territory and also the home of the Métis Nation. And we are thankful to be able to do that and to share these lands which we all occupy. A few housekeeping things. If you've been watching the chat, you'll notice that Ariel has posted a few messages about how to ask questions, that there's a poll that you can put your answers to the poll, and we'll be able to show you those results later. And then as well, there is also a question and answer button that you can, there's a Q&A button that you can ask a question on, and we will make sure that we ask those questions, or if you would prefer to ask the question live, you can do that too, and we'll let you, and we'll activate your account so that you can actually speak out loud and everybody can hear you. So lots of options with regards to asking questions. You can also raise your hand. There's a little button at the bottom that you can raise your hand. But without further ado, I would really now like to introduce the two people that are going to be the stars of the show tonight. First is Ariel Gordon. I'm sure most of you know her. She will be painting Dennis into a corner, getting his feathers ruffled and getting his back up over all kinds of different things. And she will be pressing him with great questions, and there'll be some great readings. Secondly, of course, the star of the show, one Mr. Dennis Cooley, who I think at this point really doesn't need much of an introduction. I think we're all familiar with his work. I think that pretty much everybody that's in attendance has either read Cooley at one point or will be reading him in the near future. But if you don't know who he is, Dennis Cooley is probably one of the nicest people I've ever met. He's a lovely human being and a very good poet and writer. And it pleases me to be able to host this event, which is number 3 in our At Bay Press Better Book Club series. Please welcome Ariel Gordon and Dennis Cooley.
And I thought I would hold up the book so you could see it. I know you're all working from PDFs, and many of you would have the book already, but isn't it lovely? And look, there's this faint shimmer. We all need a faint shimmer. So welcome, Dennis. How are you?
Great, wonderful. I'm so glad we're here. This is a wonderful occasion, wonderful book, and great people to be working with. So this should be fun. Thank you so much.
Yes. All right. So how tonight is going to work, how we're structuring this event, brought to you from my bedroom and Dennis's office, is that Dennis is going to grace us with a wonderful reading from the book. I'm going to put the page numbers in the chat, so if you want to follow along on your PDF, you can, or your book. And then we'll have some questions, and then he will read some more, and then we'll have more questions. And I have a couple of questions that I'm going to ask him, but we are more than happy to turn on people's mics after this first reading if they want to ask questions themselves. If they'd like me to read their questions, I can do that too from the Q&A pane. And if one of you lovely poetry readers and Dennis Cooley lovers want to read their favorite poem from this collection, please feel free. We'll turn on your mic and you can read. And I know Dennis would love that. Matt and I have each picked a poem that we'd like to read from the collection, but we'll do that at the end. We are the last priority when it comes to readers in this room. First Dennis, then the rest of you, and then us, which is how it should be. All right, Dennis, are you ready?
All right, well, great. Thanks for being here, folks. I hope that this is an enjoyable evening for you. Before I read, I just want to show you something. We were talking about design, how beautiful the cover is. this is just one of many examples of what Matt has done with design. No worry that you can't read this particular, it's designed that way. This is a postcard with some pretty, I'm sorry, it's on page 19, with some pretty serious redactions. You'll see that this postcard has been doctored up in various ways, but also a nice little touch on the top. I'm sure you can't see that, but there is a postal stamp that is a replication, comes from the cover. And there's another one you can see in the other corner. Let's see if you can make something of that. You have it in front of you, so you can work with that. Okay, so I'm going to read you several of these poems. Just a word or two. We'll talk about this later as well, but just a word or two about the muse. What I'm trying to do here. I'm dealing with a figure that's very well known, and I suppose popular, has been for many, many centuries, has been important to all sorts of people working, especially in the arts, other areas as well, actually. I don't know whether Ariel will want to talk about this later, ask me about it, but there's been a great range of muses in history. But my muse varies a whole lot. I didn't want to write what's become almost a cliche of the muse. Here we would have, I suppose, if you did a safe, normal, expected version of this, you'd have a poet who's a sensitive figure, somewhere alone, perhaps under a tree, and is sitting in a kind of nostalgia recall. The muse is off somewhere, perhaps always has been off somewhere, and the poet writes in a tender and lyrical way about the absent muse whose presence and whose help, whose inspiration the poet solicits. But I've tried to play around with the muse in all kinds of ways. So my muse is often herself, and she is herself, I think, most of the time here. In protest and complaint, she scolds the poet. The poet is often in positions of embarrassment and solicitation. So it runs a gamut in various configurations, but give you some flavor of it when we start here. I'm going to read, first of all, on pages 5 and 6, a poem called My Fair Lady, which derives from my childhood. I used to love going to the Estevan Fair. I'd ride in on my bike to the Estevan Fair, and one of the things that I was fascinated with were those magic booths. And in it was, you'll know these things even if you haven't seen them, there was a glass booth, a very small one. What would it be? 4 feet by 4 feet, 3 feet by 4 feet. And in it was a plaster woman with some kind of formal dress. And she read your fortune. So you can picture this young boy standing in front of this glass booth, seeking the My Fair Lady to see what he has to say to her. She has to say to him. My fair lady. The lady inside the smell of fried onions and the glass windows, that if the small boy stood in the light in the right spot, would send himself back. In strange and wonderful dress she sat under the carnival lights. The wheel that clacked red and black, the thick arm, round and round and round it goes, the shining hope of his dime. Learn to listen for the high rise in his body. He had come for the moment when she turned, looked up, and it ran through him, slid over the top and out, under years and years later, shivered in his groin, where she sat and turned her head, looked into his eyes, passed her hands over the snap and muffle of cards that said they would happen, when her left hand reached hesitatingly out of the booth through the slot, dropped the silent words into his hand. So there she was, an early muse, a magical lady, giving him the word. This next one is one of the many facetious poems in the book. One of the humorous configurations of the muse and her relationship with the poet. This is called courting. Page 31. She bounces on the balls of her feet, leaps, she leaves her feet. She slashes the air. He, in tentative overtures, speaks, sometimes returns achingly back to the back of courtesy. Mostly when he takes the words out of the cart and imagines some small return, none of her bone-crushing, baseline backhanded blows, the grunts that hammer them back, a terrible racket when she smashes every one of them cross, court in her loud and curt replies. His best attempts weak, out of bounds, into the net, crushingly returned, nothing but skids and slices. It is his heart she tosses above her head, threatens with one whap to burst like a blood-laden mosquito, splatter worse than a tomato tightly strung in her sun. Dried heart she stands at the net she has fastened between herself and his upstream hurt. And then a couple of more quiet and tender poems. Page 143, poem called, excuse me, In All Things. I take you with me where the two men sit, tweed suits, and then the table, empty, a plate of sunlight, the tablecloth, the glasses, shining with the late afternoon, the empty room, or nearly. Smell of coffee and you there in the room, sweet silence, the sun leans into, warm linen, the cup in my hands. And next page over 145, radio at night. The boulder upon which the world is splashing, its wishes swish ashore. When I rode toward your voice, a radio turned low at night. The large muscle of your open heart is lapping with the water's motion. The waves slosh softly against the dock. Hope, 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 they say, your face carried on the low tide, the slippery shape of tomorrow. And one last one, page 106. I want to read this for my friend John Lent, I think, who's just tuned in. I'm hoping that he was hoping to. So it's for him even if he's not here. The muse calls. For a little truth, she says. She's fed up with him, poet, rowing, wet-haired across the creeks and estuaries of life, encumbered with muddled thoughts, right? Says, first thing you beat it and you never write, never a word of thanks. You have no shame, you play fast and loose with the facts. Can never remember what I whisper in the stirry dark and sometimes spinny day. You would lose if not pinned to your back. These words have I, the muse, provided. If you find them, please return them to the rightful owner. Is it not enough, I favor you, with gifts too intimate to tell? A lot of poets would die to receive. I hope they find you, languishing in short of breath, pining for your irretrievable losses. And I'll just show you the visual, the fonts, the Muses complaint here. She's got her own special font here. She makes a request for a return of her words. So that's the reading for the moment. And I think, are you out there somewhere to turn on there? Yeah, she is.
There I is. Well, thank you. That was lovely. Okay, so now I'm going to ply you with questions. But yeah, that was really lovely. Thank you. Okay, so now the Muse Sings is your 30th book. That is quite an accomplishment. But what I want to know is, how did you first find the Muse, and how did you keep the Muse on the job and on your side?
Well, the first question is probably even harder to answer than the other one. When might this first happen? I mean, at least since that lady in the glass booth, that I mean, she was a perfect figure for that sort of thing. I didn't think at the time, right? I was just a little guy fascinated by that movement and hoping that I could get some interesting piece of good luck from her. But it was a perfect kind of image for some kind of figure delivering a mysterious knowledge or words that the kid can carry away with his shine, the shine of his dime. So that's one of the earliest points. But the muse shows up all the time. I suspect that many poets would say something like that. Not everyone is comfortable talking about muses. And there'll be several schools of poetry that say it's really nonsense. It becomes a kind of sentimental way of thinking about writing. But I believe in inspiration, and I believe in the muse. But how do you keep the muse there? Well, I think a good part of it is you keep your hand in those things that excite you that you're doing. Whether you're a dancer, you're a musician, whatever. In my case, poet. Reading other poems is one of the major ways to do that. And it may sound unbelievable, unbelievable to hear that, but I think it's true for a lot of writers. What sets you off often is other writing. So that's a source for me, a continuing source for me. But you're in terrain. Who knows when that comes? That impulse that comes to you and take you over. Possibly that may be a little strong in many cases, but it's given to you. Something's given to you. You didn't predict it. You can't control it. You can't invoke it. You can't keep it. But I think what you need is sustained attention, focus. There's a mindfulness. I looked this up in anticipation today, and I found that in classically a major definition of the muse was was a matter of keeping something in mind, carried in mind. So there's a kind of mindfulness. It's on your mind, we might say, something there. But I guess if a person know how to keep it, that would be wonderful. It'd be a secret you wouldn't want to share with anybody.
Well, and I wonder if you can train yourself to write without inspiration, right? Like if you set yourself an exercise or to sit down and write a particular kind of poet without that glow and flush of inspiration, I wonder if readers can tell, right? Like that thing that's illuminating a poem sometimes is that wonderful burst of energy and of feeling. But I wonder if you can, I wonder what poems written without that look and feel like, or if they're any different.
I don't know. I wonder if in one way or another, virtually all poems are written out of inspiration. I mean, to be excited about an idea, about a form, about how you might do this, how other people have done this. Hey, let me give a go at this. So there's that sense of being caught up in your mind. You're going to be preoccupied. Your mind is there. It is occupied in some ways with your puzzling, your excitement, your curiosity. Even though you're working more deliberately, I think you will still be in that position of inspiration, I think.
So it's degrees of inspiration.
Probably, yeah. And that by itself is not going to take you very far if you just simply depend on an inspiration. You still have to do something.
Okay. Now we have a couple of questions. One is from Luann Hebert. So Luann wants to say her question out loud, or she actually wants to read a poem. Sorry, I had that wrong. Luann Hebert wants to read one of your poems. So let me just find her in the list. Luann, do you want to put your hand up? Okay. And Matt, can you turn her mic on? or ask her to turn her mic on.
There
Okay,
you go.
Luann, so you just have to unmute yourself and then go.
All right, it's a pleasure to read some of your work, Dennis. I've decided to read Dearly Departed, and it's on page 46, after Robert Croach. It is the same old question. The four women hurtle into particles and in elements disport. She of air, she of water, she of earth, she of fire. Four who are forever preceding, who draw themselves beyond calling. All your life, they said, is a search for the dead. Always the woman on verge of speech, missed in a gust of departure gone. An impossible search for the lost. Daphnes who flee light-footed, fleet-footed Persephones, O knee, O arm, O face, who drop into darkness among the potatoes and turnips. In every story, the woman vanishes. In his broken letters, crosses the stingy, stringy pastures of his vigil, over brome and fescue, beyond reach or rescue. A dream enfolding memory, the warm hands of the mother, who is most there, pressing upon the silence.
Wonderful. Thank you, Luann.
Lovely.
Wonderful.
And can I just say, oh, do I miss Robert Croach?
Yeah. He's, I think, much thought of.
And we have another question, or we have another two questions, actually. We have one from Karen Clavel, who wants to know, wants you to talk a little bit about your balancing of ear and eye in your poetry, because you held up those pages to show us how the eye was engaged. But she wants to know how you balance those things.
Okay, I'm just looking for a page that might work here nicely. Well, here's the one I just read. One of the ones I just read. See this thing? This one, in all things, on page 143. So you'll have it there. Okay, I'll just reread it, and watch the empty spaces, the white spaces are markers of hesitation and silence. And you can take in various ways. You can use that for surprise or comedy or betrayal, whatever. But here, in this case, they're to suggest this tentativeness of quiet. Okay, so and then a kind of rough principle: the larger the gap, the longer the silence or patterns of attention. But so something like this then: in all things, I take you with me, where the two men sit, tweed suits, and then the table empty, a plate of sunlight, the tablecloth, the glasses shining with the late afternoon, the empty room, or nearly. Smell of coffee and you there in the room. Sweet silence, the sun leans into warm linen, the cup in my hands. Okay, so the pacing there is controlled largely by both the horizontal and the vertical spaces, and you get very stress patterns out of that. So that's one of the things. So visually, you're marking some patterns of sound. Of not only duration but stress. So there's the suspension at the end of the line.
But in addition to doing that, to using spacing, you do some visual things, right? And you use different fonts in the same poem, right? That's a trademark of yours.
Yeah, it's I love it. It's basically related to comic books. Right? With expressive fonts.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. That's these are generically related to them. So here's the piece on 86, 87 of all the luck. So here are when the various creatures speak. The duck speaks on page 86. Into the distance, and the duck said, "Luck, luck, luck." So you can see the yeah, you got it there. You can see you'll have it, folks, in your own pieces there. So if you put that in normal standard font, it wouldn't have nearly the sense of energy or stress or energy, right? Luck, luck, luck. And perhaps even more so, the geese speak, and there's their font, there's their voice, alas, alack. And you kind of, again, a kind of comical, exaggerated and bit eccentric font. So I played with that thing. It's not any precise thing. Part of it depends on what kind of fonts I can find or a publisher can find or will find. I once published a book in which I was working with fonts. And as it was close to production, the designer basically said to me an unpleasant word and said, "You're not going to get any. The fonts are the fonts that I've chosen, standard font." Yeah.
That is, and there you're butting two aesthetics, right? Like your aesthetic versus the designer's aesthetic, right? And luckily, Matt is a publisher and a designer that lets his authors have their way with him.
And running a small press that is his press, and it's a champion of the arts. Champion of the arts,
but he's also an author pushover. So he said to you probably, "Dennis, how many fonts do you want to use? Because I think you should use more and different fonts."
Well, it was something like that.
Yeah. Okay. There's another question here. We're chock-a-block with questions. We had one from, and I have to tell you, Dennis, you won't believe it, but Neil Besner has been heckling you in the chat.
No.
Yeah, I'm sorry. There's some heckling. There's some quibbling about your rhyming of rescue and fescue.
Can you do anything with him?
Can I do anything about him? I don't know. What can you do about a Neil Besner? But now he's protesting in the chat that he's being maligned.
I'm going to get you, Besner.
Yeah. Oh, get you. Okay, so the other question, which unfortunately has scrolled right by me in the chat. Matt, do you remember what the question was? Because I can't see it anymore because it's not in the Q&A pane.
Was it the question from Kristen?
Yes.
Okay, the question is, what happens if the muse sings to you when you don't have a pen handy?
I'm in big trouble.
That's from Kristen Whitman.
I see that, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm in big trouble, Kristen. I actually depend on a piece of paper close at hand and a pen for a moment when a phrase, something comes up. If I don't write them down, I often forget them in about 10 seconds. I'll be in a room and I say, I like that phrase. I may be able to use that. And I come down here and I say, well, I can't remember what it was. It's gone. So I try and write things down immediately, even the most silly things.
So do you have your notebook with you right there? I want to see your notebook.
I got just some messy manuscripts laying around. I mean, where I write in the manuscripts.
But when you are scribbling down those first drafts, do you have a notebook or do you do it on random pieces of paper?
No, I just put them on random pieces of paper.
So this is my latest notebook and it's almost full. In fact, writing about our event was like the second last page. So notebooks. Show me some of the notes. Do you mind holding up the notes on the manuscript?
Okay, here. Now I've thrown out almost all those things. Here, I'll find you something.
Because we're using the power of video.
Here's a page of stuff where I've got notes. I often take them from handwriting. I type them into my computer and we'll print them out and everything. So here's a page of just this and that and that thing. It's probably not going to amount to nothing, but you can see there's some text printed there. And
That's a pretty deep edit for a page edit.
Well, that's just material that it may take it somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not finished. It's just resources that I think have potential.
So now I'm just going to say to audience member, we're deep in the Cooley archive. So you won't get that anywhere else. You're not going to get that in an in-person event.
No.
This is the magic of Zoom.
You won't get messes at launches.
No, this is a wonderful mess. Okay, so if we have we've taken a break from our questions to the questions I'm going to ask some of your questions. Does anybody else want to read a poem before we get going again? I know there's one or more of you that want to read a poem. Okay, who has their hand up? I think someone does. Oh, Marjolaine Hebert, you have your hand up. Do you want to say something? Oh, she would. Matt, oh, there we go. Okay, Marjo, read us a poem and tell us what page it is.
All right, the poem is Reading and it's page 140. I'm very much missing being in the studio due to COVID. So, reading. The brush of your hand on the page. The book marks the secret spot you take and tuck within the covers, and in faint hope open. Your sun-dried thoughts are turning to powder, alkali that rims a slough. Dream the ink will float like pepper to the surface. The yellowheads on broken reeds calling when they settle back.
Mm. Lovely. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Voicing. Lovely, really fun.
Dennis, do you ever do a thing where you have particular words that you use many times? Because this is the second instance of sun-dried.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, well, I don't know. This must happen a lot for people. There is. I mean, there are patterns that I don't know if the word is fall into, that you're drawn to. And sometimes I get a manuscript, say, "Oops, I got 3 or 4 of the versions of this one. Maybe I better pull a few."
Yeah, it's funny because you find yourself searching the manuscript for particular words.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of funny. And sometimes you don't notice those patterns. Sometimes you do. And then someone's like, there's an awful lot of sun-dried in this manuscript, Neil.
But there's when the computer is your best friend.
Yeah.
Okay,
again,
how many
the
times
magic of technology.
Yeah.
So it looks like Neil Besner wants to speak, which is shocking. Shocking.
All right. Okay.
So Matt, can you turn on Neil? Neil, are you there?
Yes, I can. He just disappeared here, but there, I will turn him on right now. 1 second. Oh, he has to, there we go. I got him. Go ahead, Neil.
Neil, you have to turn your mic on.
There. Oh.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, Neil.
Hey, Dennis. I wanted to read He Writes to the Muse on page 20, 21. You got it?
Yes.
Okay. He writes to the Muse. Respectfully yours sincerely, respectfully, yours truly, sincerely yours faithfully, appreciatively. Kind regards, thank you, regards, best regards, salutations, Godspeed. Cordially yours, gratefully, Godspeed, thank you, many thanks, best wishes, all best, yours, good wishes. Once again, admiringly, your friend, wishing you well, best wishes for your future, hoping to hear from you. I look forward to hearing from you. Warmest personal regards. For now, until next time, till tomorrow, fondly, happily, warmly, take care, much love, with love, missing you always. Please remember me, all my love, much happiness. With all my love, with all my heart, with all of my love, now and forever, ever yours, all my love, forever yours, now and ever, soon, always and forever, eternally yours, ever and always, never ending, always yours, XOXOXOX. Impatiently, I'll be in touch, can't wait, lots of love, expectantly, can't wait till you're back, till the day I see you again. Later, cheers, adios, so long, keep it real, see you later, be good, love and kisses, loaves and fishes, onward and upward, can't wait, hugs and kisses, hear from you soon, talk to you later, be seeing ya. I remain, lady, your most humble and obedient servant. May I live always to serve you in your crown. Until we meet again, when will I ever see you again? My God, I miss you. Why don't you fucking write? Please write.
Yeah, that's great. And it's almost better if you read it straight without, like, do you know what I mean? Without like mugging and trying to use a theatrical voice. That's awesome.
Yeah, you're
So
wonderful
much feel.
sense of that voice as it moves through various stages of solicitation.
Someone wrote me an email today and ended it with warmly. And I wanted to write hotly in return. Hotly, comma. Yours hotly.
Good expression.
Yeah.
Somebody wakes up every day for warmly.
Yeah.
I kind of like that most
Okay.
of the time, I think.
I have to put you on the spot about the Muse again. And then we have another question from your audience. Okay, so 50% of marriages, we're told, end in divorce. But what happens when the Muse wants out and quits on you?
Oh, poetry dries up.
Yeah.
Actually, it's hardly just a passive thing in any case, isn't it? That you can chug away. You put yourself in a position. I sometimes think that what happens is that it's kind of neurons who get jazzed up. You get the brain working in terrain where the neurons are at work, particularly if you're a poet in that kind of terrain, that kind of language, those kinds of awareness. And how do we ever have an original thought? I mean, the neurons have got to take a funny path, right? So what you're trying to do is get your brain to kind of go off kilter. The neurons misfire or zap off in other directions, as they do all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So you're looking for misadventure, failure, neurological failure.
But not not actual stroke. You don't want to have a stroke in the search of a poem.
Yeah. It's hard to say where is inspiration located, whether you call it muse or whatever, right? We've got various explanations. You talk to the gods. You're some psychological imbalance or nudge that's pushes your mechanism in some direction or other. I think you've got something about this, haven't you?
Your mechanism. I often like having my mechanism prodded.
Yeah. It's real safe. There are a couple of muses in here that are mechanisms. There's a printer.
Yes. Well, and that gets us to Kristen Werman's question. She has a follow-up question. And I'm sure this was meant in the most polite way. It says, not to point out your age, but what is better and what is worse about writing on a computer as opposed to writing on the page?
Well, I do most of my composing initially by hand, but with pen and paper. So that those kind of notes that are there, and I gather, and I gather around other notes. So I get pages that are filled with scribbly phrases, and that may be related, may go somewhere together. So I do that, and I also will write some parts of poems, maybe whole versions of poems on the page, and then I put them in the computer. So the computer for me is more a matter of convenience, not a site particularly to compose poems, as to move words around with great flexibility. They're wonderful for positioning. I'm sure I would put there, right? If you had a computer, if you had a typewriter, back in the old days, how do you write justify? It's a nightmare. Here it's one button, you got it. So you do both things, but
John
I
Lent.
like the handwriting to compose things.
Mhm.
And I like it for various reasons. I like the physical feel of it, but it also brings you to a more meditative rhythm and form of attention. You're not as speeded as attended to something out there, or you're daydreaming over the page, pushing some ink around, you doodle and babble. So I think for me, both of them are important, and I think they give you different advantages.
John Lent has something to say about that. He says, "What the hell? My mechanism prodded. Holy moly, you Winnipeggers."
You live too long
So
in
let's ask.
Okanagan, John Lent.
Let's ask the people in the audience. Like, we've got lots of poets in the audience. So how many people in the audience write first draft exclusively on paper, and who are partly computer and partly paper? Because that's where I fall. I'm partly paper and partly computer. Paper,
Anybody got a
says
pencil?
Marjolaine. Anybody else want to chime in? So what? Oh, pencil and paper. Paper computer, says Luann Hebert. Annie Deely says pencil and paper. Partly paper, partly computer, says John Lent. Kristen Werman says paper, first draft, ink, and then to the computer for the rest. And Luella Lester says both. So we're a split audience. We're a mixed audience. Dennis, would you read another poem for us?
Good. Yes, I will.
Does anybody have any requests that they want Dennis poems they want Dennis to read?
Yeah,
Karen Clavel says primarily computer.
Well, I have another chance at it too, right? If you think in a minute.
Yeah. So why don't you read and tell us what page, and then we'll see if people have any requests for you.
This is 42-3. I love doing this one. I love to read it. You see a small device there with a font of the style and the size of it. So the title is "He Escapes with the Muse," but not quite. He almost escapes with the Muse. So the graphics there is an important part of the statement. Anyway, here's this one. The plane sputters and coughs, thumps down the runway. It gasps and lurches slightly to the side, shivers and clutter in consternation. A gaggle of people running clumsily as if they were loose luggage in tow or fallen off the cart, and a lot of angry poets in a flap, rags in the tail of a kite. The poet and the muse have commandeered a plane, and they are taxiing for takeoff, runaways on the tarmac. Come back, you son of a bitch! Where the hell do you think you're going? They flail and shout, stumble, shake their fists, a mob closing on Quasimodo. The poet hunches over the throttle, launches himself against their gravity, begs and calls down affliction upon the weight of the world. The muse puts her left hand on his right shoulder, anxious they will never get off the ground. The plane shakes and tremors, sags into a terrible fit of coughing. The ragged pursuit rallies, their spirits lift, they're closing fast, all of them cursing and lurching, swept in their own flighting. The poets, worst of all. The plane splutters and begins to slouch into itself, hiccups and dies. You selfish bastard, they holler. What the hell are you doing with the muse? You can't have her all to yourself. She's our muse too, you know.
Beautiful. So Dennis, Karen Clavel wants to know if you want to read the poem on page 36.
I don't know what's on 36. It might be a hard one to read.
Maybe that's why she asked you.
She would.
And Neil Besner has said, "Coolius indignatius." You've been turned into a Latin organism, an organism with a Latin name, let's say.
Okay, this is, I hadn't read this for a little bit here, so I just let me work this. She said, pulling alongside, the story in tow, and she hastened into the street. Page numbers, you got it? 36?
36.
She said, pulling alongside, the story in tow, and she hastened into the street. They were freighted with meaning, her words. He was frightened of what she might say. Could there be any pleasing of the muse or appeasing of disdain? He couldn't understand the moist and huffy sounds, her thoughts hoisted onto the air in a luminous halo. No, it's no bother. Not really, she said. She liked it. She did it all the time. Her exhalations shone where she looped them, alive as northern lights. Sometimes when it was winter and her face red with cold, she would pull her breath in gray mittens over his face.
Lovely.
You know what? I got to say this. We haven't mentioned this at all. There was somebody called Barbara Schott, who was the editor in this book. She was an incredibly able and skilled and dedicated editor, and she was an enormous help on this. I can't say enough about how good she was and how dedicated she was to her work. So thanks to Barb Schott.
So with that, then, Dennis, with that, I'd like to take a moment and then read the poem that I selected tonight to read, seeing as you've done that wonderful intro for Barb Schott. And here, I'll just come on screen for a second. You guys all have to bear with my visage again. This one is called The Poet's Letter. Hold on here, sorry. We're on page 18, and this particular poem is for Barbara Schott, and it's called The Poet's Letter of Surcease and Submission. Pain I can take, also disdain and reprisal. What more can a poet hope? Go ahead and deliver a little grief. Why spare the wrangle and bicker? The odd word of humiliation wouldn't hurt. I can live with that. I can take that. You won't catch me by surprise in a ganglion of hurt. Have learned to prize all you can send and to accept the scoffing. Happy to praise the package of scorn neatly wrapped in twine and barbed wire. Wait for a COD at the door with pliers and a smile in my hand.
You're an ungrateful poet.
Yeah, that's right. I love this one. And you know what? Working with Barb was a true dream, and just wonderful to work with. I will say with Barb, there were a few late night phone calls where she was sputtering, where she had to deal with Dennis and said, Matt, I don't know what to do.
We should have wondered.
He's getting on my nerves. Anyway, we worked our way through it. It was a lot of fun, and I'm so happy that we were all able to work together on this beautiful book. Anyway, back to you, Ariel.
Okay, I'm returning to my bank, my treasure trove of questions. Okay, so Dennis, can you tell us about your sense of reading in public? I mean, we made you read a poem that you haven't read in a while. And when we were discussing the poems you might read tonight, you wanted to pick the ones that were poems that people could grasp in one sitting, right? Not things that were extremely dense. So what do you like to read, for instance? Are there poems in this collection that you're reluctant to read? And what is it for you to write and read in private and then to read in public? And to take that a bit further, does the venue make any difference? Like this webinar, for instance, length, tone, difficulty, subject, what sense of audience in what you write and what you read? That's a many questions in one
Yeah.
question, but I feel like you can pull something out there.
Okay, it's so different from me reading poems by myself privately, because I can move as quickly or as slowly as I want. And I don't have to be concerned about how this might be available to somebody, whether they're in a room with me or on some kind of digital platform or whatever. So I will read a much greater range. Obviously I'll read all the poems that I read at one time or another, but I'm reluctant to read some poems in public, or most circumstances in public, if they're really complex, hard to follow. They're also what makes them often very hard to read. And I would think that I'm not alone in wanting to choose for public performances texts that I think I can read fairly well or fairly confidently. That it's a terrible kind of thing to say, I'm out here, I'm in the middle of a joke and nobody's laughing. I've got this poem that's in a tangle, and I lost the rhythm of it, and so is everyone else. So I try and choose ones that I like to read, and that I think might have a fairly wide appeal for people who are often hearing you under very difficult circumstances. I've never seen this poem before. I've never heard you read it, read a word that you've written. I've never read any poems for 10 years, whatever. So it's these things put a pretty big demand on readers. So I'm conscious of that. But occasions for reading, my favorite circumstance for reading, public reading, is radio. I mean, in different ways, I like them all. I mean, I love readings. That's that sense of friendship in a room, or people with a kind of shared terrain of joking and memories and things. And here you have this sense of immediately available to whoever's speaking, wherever they are. I mean, and the convenience of this. But the radio, I love the radio because you get through the technology and the physical space, a place where there's no noise, and you have a beautiful pickup of your voice, the rhythms, the smallest changes in volume, intonation, and there are no distractions.
It's almost like the purest way to be heard.
Yeah, well, some people prefer there's somebody there, and I like that in many ways. But for me, the downside, I get easily distracted. I shouldn't say this. People will now distract me steadily, but you know, if people look at their watches and they stand up when they're talking to their neighbors, I do find that distracting. But on the radio, it's just the space into which you project the voice, and so you can get yourself into it in ways that I really like.
But the funny thing is that people will listen to the radio as back, like, you know, recordings like that sometimes, or particularly the radio when I was growing up with it, people would listen to it for background sound. And so you can't necessarily fix them with your evil eye of stop talking during an event, for instance. Like my house growing up was a police state for CBC radio. We weren't allowed to turn it off. We could turn it down a little, but then my mom would march in and turn it all the way back up again.
Hey, good for mom.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't. It was just one bit. Is there anything else you want to ask, or that I've lost there that you want to go back to?
So let's talk about some of the language around the muse. So there's all those muse words like bemused, amused, museum, music. Did you find yourself playing with all of those muse words when you were writing this collection?
Actually, some I didn't. I didn't use bemused, and I didn't use the museum. They're both, bemused is a great word for the sense of being occupied, right? I'm bemused. Yeah. You know, what have I got here? It's something kind of working away in my brain. But thanks for bringing this up. The museum, right, is a site of memory. And I don't know if I'm going to spoil your something I thought you had planned, but here it goes. Mnemosyne, among the classical Greek muses, and most of the time there were 9. Sometimes there were other numbers, but of the 9, well, even a smaller number, the mother of all the muses was Mnemosyne, which means memory. The chief muse is memory. You recall, you bring it back, you recover it. So that sense of things brought in, saved, brought into the present, to have these on your mind are there. And that's what a museum is, of course, right? It's a memory site, big memory chamber.
Mhm.
Yeah. And of course, you're amused, and you're into musings, as I tried to play with the title, not just the Muse Sings, but the musings.
And of course, you dedicated your book to that muse, the chief muse, of course. And
Awesome, yeah.
I realized when you first said that name, I'd actually never heard it spoken out loud. You read words and you never hear them spoken. So it was actually quite lovely and musical to hear you say it. Can you say it again?
Mnemosyne. The aim is silent. Mnemosyne.
Okay.
But we actually know a cognate. We know what mnemonics are, mnemonic devices. So we can remember.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
I love that. So what other names do we have for the muse? For those feelings of being sparked into something? I mean, obviously we have inspiration is the main one.
And we speak of a fervor, even just distractedness, I guess. You even have focus, you may have a distractedness. I was reaching over here to grab off my little page the list of the classical muses. I'm not going to give you the names because they're you won't remember it anyway. At least I don't. But let me tell you what they are. 9 muses of classical world. 5 of them are muses for poetry. Of the 9, 5 were for poetry. And for the Greeks, we had a muse for epic poetry, lyric poetry, love poetry, comic and pastoral poetry, sacred poetry. And the 4 left dealt with lesser things. 4 others are history, tragedy, dance, and astronomy.
Well, and I love that. And I love that, poetry finally gets as many categories as it deserves.
Yeah.
Like you look at the Globe 100 best books of 2020 and, there were 2 poetry titles or 1 poetry title and the rest was dominated by fiction and nonfiction. So, I like that we get 4 muses.
Yeah. One of the things that interests me here are that one of the muses is history, one is astronomy, right?
Oh.
So, I mean, the muses aren't peculiar to the arts, right? You can have muse, the notion of inspiration or of something springing into your head. There it is. I don't know where it came from, but it came to me that this is part of.
You often hear about scientific discoveries.
All the time.
Yeah. John Lent says rupture, rapture.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, do we have, we are at 8:02. We promised that this event would be about an hour. We are happy to stay a little longer and continue chatting. But before people have to run, let's do our book giveaway. Matt, do you want to come on and do the giveaway, which is for a signed copy of this book? Oops, this book. Matt, are you there?
Hi, I'm back again. Much to your chagrin. Just kidding. Yeah, we've got a beautiful signed copy to give away of the Muse Sings. It is not signed by any muses, but it will come signed by the magician himself, Dennis Cooley. So, what I'm going to do here is I've got all of these wonderful names of all the attendees listed here in a little digital hat, we'll call it. And I am going to blindfold myself and select a name off of this wonderful list. Here we go. And the winner is Luann Hebert is tonight's winner of the free autographed copy of The Muse Sings by Dennis Cooley.
Hey,
Luann, I'm going to get you to send me an email with your mailing address, and this way I can mail out your book. But for now, I'm going to disappear again and hand it back to Ariel and Dennis. But I do want to just quickly say before I take off that this wonderful event is brought to you by At Bay Press and the Manitoba government's Safe at Home program. And we'd just like to acknowledge that as well too. Thanks to the Manitoba government for putting together this wonderful idea and this wonderful program so that people can stay safe and enjoy some great programming. And that's a really special thing that we've got going on. And hey, it's only happening in Manitoba to the best of my knowledge. So it's another kudos to the province as well for coming up with this idea. So Ariel,
So Matt,
yeah.
Who's next week's author?
Oh, nobody
Trade
wants to know that, do they?
Oh, I think they do. I think they
Okay.
need to know.
Next week is going to be the great Brad Smith. Brad Smith is a very, very, very well-known mystery, political crime novelist out of Toronto. Actually, I should say out of Ontario. He's not from Toronto. And so his book is a searing political Trumpian thriller. You won't want to miss Brad talking about his book next week, especially in light of all of the events that have been happening in our southern neighbors' country. So that'll be next week on Monday at 7 p.m.
So that's January 25th is Brad Smith, and then February 1st is Mary Barnes, who's
That's
here attending tonight. So I'm really looking forward to
As
hearing
am
from
I.
him.
Mary Barnes
Yeah.
is going to be another really special event, and she'll be talking about her book, What Fox Knew, which is just another stunning book of poetry. So back to you guys.
Can I read my poem? Your poem? Can I do my reading of your poem?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
You read it, it's yours.
I particularly wanted to read this one because I have been sort of saving myself the last couple of weeks by going for walks in Assiniboine Forest and following deer trails. And, you know, so I really wanted to read this poem. It's called Capel. It's on page 8 and 9. So here goes. Capel for Kathy Beveridge. Every day and every night, a medley of coyotes and insects sing a cappella. At dawn, when sun ambushes them in the first messy light, she flees among the dry grasses where deer have lain, past the clump of trembling aspen, light, shadow, past the sweetness of mustard and clover, flowers dusty with their modest dress, the speckles of blue and yellow, up to her ankles, splashing to her shins, to knees, hips, chest, neck. She is disappearing into a cleft in the world where the coyotes last night in sudden thrill had cornered something. It is here she calls, at first softly. Who is it, please? Are you there? His voice, she thinks, it is him calling, and then a thin, chill cry. Capel. Someone must have spoken from the back of her throat. Capel. L. all she could think to say, who's there? Who is it? Please, who is there? Thank you.
Thank you.
That was,
Thank you very
yeah.
much. Yeah.
Do we have any more? Do we have any more comments? Do we have any more questions? There are still 18 of you in the room. So if there is anything that you want to know, anything that you have been burning to ask Dennis about, I could ask about that poem. Should I ask you about that poem in particular?
Right.
Okay. So several of the poems involve descents, including that one. What's with that one? What's with that? Sorry, what's with that?
Good, good. I'm glad you asked that. One of the myths we all know, even if we've forgotten the names, takes on in one of its versions Orpheus and Eurydice. Orpheus, the poet of a lyre who sings and who ends up being ripped apart by the Bacchae because they thought he paid them scant attention. But his story, these take various configurations. A very common one is he loses his beloved to the underworld, and he goes searching for her to bring her back. So the descent in all kinds of configurations is often thought of and presented as if there's a kind of tapping, turning to some basic or kind of primal essential experiences or realities and being transfigured from those. The descent into the underworld is a really old story, isn't it? The romantics love that story. For the romantics, you're constantly going underground to find power and renewal. Yeah.
Is that the subconscious as well as
sure.
going to death?
Yeah, why not, eh? One of the poems I have in here, I think it's called The Rescue, ends with this person looking down into the darkness where he says it's your id I see. See at the bottom.
Can you read that one?
Well, what page is it at?
Oh, that's a good question. Here, I'm going to look at the table of contents. The Rescue. Oh, I'm sorry. I should have actually looked this up before I asked you. Do not know. Rescue Mission 112?
Yeah, where's that?
112.
There are quite a few that deal with that. There are two long poems late in the poem that also work with the descent myth.
Oh, Karen Cobell had it. She put 112 in the chat, even as we were looking for it.
Oh, okay. Excellent. Rescue Mission. So this is a version, right, of that story. Talk about a terrible undertaking. His heart turns black in quixotic attempts to bring her back from the ravishing. Dead, she calls, and hearing he turns. Back, peers down the steps into the dim hall from which they hope to flee. It is not, he says, a man in white I see, spiraling into the dark. It is your id I see. So we'll pick up the story of Eurydice and then some kind of psychoanalytical play that runs through this off the name.
Lovely. I'm overusing that word, but like sun-dried. But this has all been very lovely.
Okay, before you go, can I say one small thing? I was looking at the poll you got there, and folks are passing their notions about where the muse can be found. And I'm a little disappointed to see how low the pub comes in that poll. Here is a small piece of the poem. This came from John Newlove. I saw it in a letter that he wrote one time. And I loved it so much. This is here, so it's slightly changed, but here it is From a pub, poets eventually find their way, but you, dear Muse, they never leave.
Mm. Mm.
I think that's wonderful.
Well, interestingly, the answer to that first question was where can you best find the muse? The answer, I think the overwhelming answer to that one was in nature.
Oh, okay, I'm looking at a different, no, the one I'm looking says in the library.
Yes. What's the best place to find the muse? But we had
Yeah.
asked the first question, which was, there were 4 questions. We asked, where can you best find the muse? Oh, wait a second. Did I ask the same question? No, I didn't ask
Well,
the
there was
same
a slightly
question.
different one question I think you
Yeah.
had.
What's the best? Oh, it is the same. The same question posed twice.
Oh, okay.
That's the best kind of question.
Were people consistent?
Yes. They said in nature and then also in the library. So no, not consistent, but consistently in their opposition, because most of them chose those 2. And I think owls won out as
Okay.
well,
Yeah.
which, makes sense.
Nobody chose the snake.
I think very few people choose snakes generally. I love snakes. I think they should be chosen more often. I used to catch garter snakes when I was a kid, and loved them. But my dad was terrified of them.
Oh, yeah.
Which we liked. I mean, it's always good to find a fear in a parent that you can exploit.
Must have been a terrible kid.
I was not. Okay, so unless this is like an auction, going once, going twice, and nobody else has any questions, should we end it there?
I think so.
I think so.
What does Matt say?
Well, we want to say some thank yous before we go.
Speaking the matter to me.
Well, to
Yeah.
either of you. Are you inspired to say anything before we go?
I'm inspired to say thank you to everybody who attended, and just so pleased that you guys made it out on a freezing cold night. I'm sure you guys had long commutes to get here, and we were so thrilled that you made the effort. All jokes aside, wonderful guys. Thank you so much. And I also want to take the opportunity to thank Ariel Gordon for hosting this event with the great Dennis Cooley, who is truly a Manitoba poetic treasure. So
can I get everyone in the chat that's still left to give Dennis a round of applause?
Yes, a silent round of applause.
They can type the word clap, clap.
Yes, you can. That's exactly it.
They used to have an icon that you could put a little like clapping icon in things.
There they
look,
come.
We've got applause. We've got shouting. Nathan Dewick, who's not a shouter, is shouting.
Oh,
he's like, woohoo, Cooley!
My thanks too all around. I'm always very grateful for any support that people show to writers in writing, and you certainly can't take it for granted, especially if you're a poet. But the folks have been extremely supportive and generous, and I greatly appreciate that. Even though, as David Arneson once said to us long ago when we were getting involved in publishing, he said, I know about poets. Then you got to know about poets. Is they're all vain and they're all ungrateful.
Oh.
Well, on that note,
they're mean and grasping, and
that too. Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, again, thanks to everybody who joined us tonight, and look after each other out there, and stay safe and stay healthy.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. All right, shut her down.
Here we go.